The rain fell hard against the tall glass windows of Michael's office building in Boston. Most of the lights on the upper floors were already dark. It was past 7, and the city outside was drowning in silver streaks of water. Michael sat at his desk, exhausted after another long day. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and a stack of unfinished blueprints stared back at him. He had been running on coffee and deadlines for weeks, pushing himself harder than ever, and still, the work never seemed to end. The office was so quiet that the sound of the rain almost felt like company. Michael rubbed his eyes, thinking about going home, when he heard the soft click of heels approaching. He looked up to see Emily, the new member of the design team, carrying a folder in her arms. She looked a little surprised to find someone else still there. "You're working late, too?" she asked with a small smile. Michael returned a tired smile. "Deadlines don't really care about the time." Emily laughed softly, setting the folder on his desk. "These are the sketches you asked for. I figured I'd finish them before the morning rush." Her voice carried a calm confidence, the kind of tone that made ordinary words feel lighter. For a moment, Michael forgot the weight of the day. They began talking first about the project, then about the weather, and soon about life outside the office. Emily mentioned she had just moved to Boston from Chicago and was still learning her way around the city. Michael told her about his favorite coffee shop near the harbor, and how the view of the water helped clear his head when the pressure of work became too much. The conversation flowed easily, more naturally than Michael expected. It had been years since he felt this kind of spark in simple conversation. Emily's laughter was soft but genuine, and her eyes carried a warmth that reached straight through his tired soul. He found himself leaning forward without realizing it, listening more closely than he should. Time slipped by quickly. When Emily glanced at the clock and noticed how late it was, she shook her head. "I didn't mean to keep you from your work." "You didn't," Michael admitted. "Honestly, this was the best part of my day." The words escaped before he could think. Emily looked at him for a second longer than necessary, then smiled politely and picked up her umbrella. "Good night, Michael." As she left, Michael sat in silence, watching the rain hit the glass. A strange emptiness settled in the room without her presence. For the first time in years, he felt alive, awake in a way that startled him. He knew it wasn't right he was married. He had a wife waiting at home, but that simple exchange with Emily stirred something he thought he had lost long ago. The drive home was slow, the streets shining with rain. Michael's mind replayed the sound of Emily's laughter, the way she leaned slightly closer when they spoke, the ease of her company. Guilt tugged at him. He told himself it was just a friendly chat, nothing more. But deep down, he knew how much he had enjoyed it, and that was the part that unsettled him. When he walked into his house, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She smiled warmly when she saw him, but Michael hesitated before kissing her cheek. Something about the evening made him feel distant, like there was a secret he hadn't meant to keep but was already hiding at dinner. Sarah asked about his day, about the project he was working on, about whether he'd be able to take a weekend off soon. Michael answered, but his mind wasn't fully there. He found himself distracted by memories of the conversation he'd just had, comparing the lightness he felt with Emily to the quiet routine he had with Sarah. He hated himself for the thought. He loved his wife. They had built a life together, shared countless moments, both good and bad. Yet sitting across from her now, couldn't ignore the feeling that something in their marriage had grown heavy and tired. That night, as Michael lay awake in bed, listening to the rain still falling outside, he replayed every moment of the conversation with Emily. He told himself it was nothing, just two coworkers talking after hours. But the truth was undeniable. He had felt something he hadn't expected, something that both thrilled and terrified him. Michael didn't know it yet, but that single evening had opened a door he could never close again. The weeks after that rainy night moved quickly, yet Michael felt every day way heavier on his chest. Work became the highlight of his routine, not because of the projects or the deadlines, but because of Emily. He tried to convince himself it was harmless. She was just a colleague, someone who understood him in ways his wife, Sarah, hadn't lately. Still, every time he walked into the office and saw her smile, His heart skipped in a way it hadn't for years. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Emily asked about his childhood, about what inspired him to become an architect, about his dreams beyond work. Michael found himself telling her stories he hadn't even shared with Sarah in a long time. Emily listened with genuine interest, her eyes lighting up at every detail. She laughed at his small jokes, remembered the little things he told her, and sometimes sent him quick messages late at night, joking about the day or sharing thoughts that seemed meant only for him at first. Michael ignored the buzzing phone when Sarah was near, but soon he became used to slipping his phone out of sight, replying quickly in the bathroom or on the way to bed. He told himself it was nothing serious, just friendly banter. Yet inside, he knew it was more than that. Sarah noticed the change almost immediately. At dinner, she asked questions about his day, but his answers grew shorter. She reached for his hand across the table, but his eyes were fixed on his plate or his phone. At night, when she leaned closer, he turned away with excuses about being tired. The warmth between them that once came so naturally now felt forced. Sarah tried to hold on. She cooked his favorite meals, suggested a weekend trip, even left him notes on the fridge like she used to when they were first married. Michael smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere, caught up in the rush of emotions he felt at work. The truth was cruel but simple. The attention from Emily filled a space in him he hadn't realized was empty. One evening, Michael stayed late again. Emily walked into his office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use one," she said. He laughed, grateful, and they ended up sitting side by side going through designs. Her shoulder brushed against his, and instead of moving away, he let the moment linger. The air between them grew heavier, but neither said a word about it. The next morning, Sarah asked why he had come home so late. Michael explained it was just work, nothing unusual. She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She didn't believe him fully, though she didn't have proof. Her heart told her something was slipping away, but she held her silence, hoping it was only her imagination. At the office, Michael tried to focus on his responsibilities, but Emily's presence was a constant pull. She leaned in to show him a sketch one afternoon, her voice low and steady, and Michael felt his breath catch. It wasn't physical closeness alone, it was the intensity in her eyes, as if she understood what he was feeling without a word spoken. He wanted to remind himself of his boundaries, of the vows he had made, of the life he had built with Sarah, but in that instant, reason slipped away. He didn't step back. He didn't create the space he should have. Instead, he stayed there, frozen, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since his 20s. That night, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept peacefully beside him. His chest tightened with guilt, yet the memory of Emily's nearness replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. He hated the duality of it, the love he still carried for Sarah and the new, dangerous feelings stirring for Emily. Over the next few days, the distance at home grew more obvious. Sarah reached out less, her silence heavy with questions she didn't ask. She noticed how often Michael smiled at his phone, how quickly he set it down when she entered the room. She didn't confront him, but the fear in her heart grew. Meanwhile, Michael told himself he could still control everything. He believed he could enjoy the thrill of connection with Emily without letting it cross the line. But control is fragile, and every time Emily laughed at his jokes or sent him a thoughtful message, the line blurred further. Then came the moment that changed everything. Emily stopped by his office late one evening carrying a stack of papers. The rest of the floor was empty, silent. She leaned over his desk to show him a detail on the drawing, her perfume faint but unmistakable. Michael looked at her, really looked, and something in her gaze told him she felt it tooth pull. The unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. He should have stepped back. He should have ended it there. But he didn't. His silence was its own choice, and in that stillness, he knew he had already lost the control he thought he had, and nothing between them or at home would ever feel the same again. The moment Michael stopped pulling away, the line he had promised himself never to cross blurred into something unrecognizable. It began so subtly that he could almost deny a tan extra smile, A lingering pause, a glance that carried meaning. But what was once harmless friendship turned into something far more dangerous. Their conversations shifted. No longer only about work or design, they drifted into late-night texts about loneliness, about what it felt like to carry silent disappointments. Michael found himself confiding in Emily about things he never voiced to stir the pressure of his job. The fear of fading dreams, the hollow space he felt in his marriage. Emily listened, responded with warmth, and told him about her own struggles. Two hearts quietly aching had found each other, and that connection grew like fire in dry grass, silent at first. Then unstoppable. At home. Sarah felt the distance like a storm pressing against her windows. She asked fewer questions now. Her attempts at closeness met with half-hearted smiles and distracted nods. The man she loved was still in front of her, but his spirit was elsewhere, unreachable. She tried to fight the sinking fear that someone or something had taken his attention away. Michael, however, was caught between two worlds. He loved Sarah, or at least he told himself he did. But every time he was with Emily, a different side of him came alive, the side that laughed without effort, that felt young again, that believed someone truly saw him. He convinced himself it wasn't serious, that it was just a temporary escape from stress. Yet every message, every glance, every stolen moment told him the truth. This was more than escape. He was falling. One Friday evening, Sarah surprised him with news. She had booked a weekend getaway for the two of them, hoping time away from work would bring them closer again. "Just the two of us," she said, her eyes full of hope. Michael forced a smile, agreeing, though his heart twisted with guilt. He wanted to want this with her, but his mind was already clouded with thoughts of Emily. That same night, his phone buzzed with a message. "I miss you already." It's 5 words from Emily, but they carried more weight than Sarah's entire plan. He sat frozen in the living room, phone in hand, Sarah humming softly in the kitchen as she prepared their late dinner. The contrast between the two women crushed him. One was his wife, the partner who had built a life with him. The other was the woman who made him feel alive in ways he hadn't felt in years. He told himself it wasn't love, that he was just flattered by the attention, but the truth was harsher. His heart had begun to drift, and no excuse could change that. In the office, their secret grew heavier. They never spoke of it openly, but their eyes gave everything away. A casual brush of hands when passing papers, a pause that lasted too long. Silence that said more than words. Every interaction deepened the unspoken bond. Michael felt both thrilled and terrified, torn between desire and conscience. Meanwhile, Sarah's hope dimmed with each passing day. She planned dinners, tried to share old jokes, suggested calling their friends for a night out. But Michael's enthusiasm never matched hers. The man who once held her with warmth now seemed distracted, as if living a life she no longer belonged to. She didn't know what had changed, but she knew something had. The breaking point came quietly. One evening, Michael stayed late again. Sarah, determined to reconnect, packed a small bag of his favorite food and drove to his office. When she arrived, she found the lights dim and the building nearly empty. She walked the quiet halls, bag in hand, and paused when she saw Michael through the glass of his office. He was standing close to Emily, too close. They weren't touching, but the air between them spoke louder than any embrace. Sarah's heart dropped. She didn't enter. She didn't confront them. She walked back to her car, her hands trembling, the food she had prepared now heavy in her grip. She cried quietly the whole way home, unable to deny what her eyes had seen. When Michael arrived later that night, Sarah said nothing. She didn't ask where he had been, didn't question the tired excuse he gave. But something inside her shifted. Trust had cracked, and though she didn't yet have proof beyond her own instincts, she knew her marriage was no longer whole. Michael sensed it too. The silence at home became louder than any argument. He wanted to explain, to tell her he was lost and confused, but guilt kept his lips sealed. He carried the weight of both women in his heart, Sarah, his wife, and Emily, the secret he couldn't let go of. Days blurred into nights, and the tension thickened. Every choice Michael made felt like betrayal, no matter which direction he turned. He told himself he could still fix it, that maybe he hadn't gone too far. But the truth was clear. The moment he allowed himself to slip, everything changed. The secret was no longer just his. It was written in Sarah's quiet eyes, in Emily's late-night words, in the ache that filled every room he walked into. His life had split, and there was no clean way back. Michael stood on the edge of a decision that would define everything. One step could keep his family together. The other could destroy it forever. And as he held his phone one late evening, staring at Emily's message glowing in the dark, he realized there was no escape from the truth. He had already gone too far. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything came undone. The house smelled of fresh coffee. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen table. And for a moment, it looked like an ordinary day. But Sarah's hands trembled as she held Michael's phone. She hadn't meant to look, hadn't planned on invading his privacy. But when the screen lit up with a message, her eyes fell on it before she could stop herself. "I miss you already." 5 words. That was all it took to break her world apart. Her chest tightened, and she sat frozen, reading the message again and again. She didn't need more proof. Her heart had already known the truth for weeks. Now the words confirmed what her silence had been screaming. Michael was no longer hers alone. When Michael walked into the kitchen, he noticed her pale face, the phone clutched in her hand. The room felt heavier than air. Sarah's eyes met his, filled with hurt that no words could soften. She didn't raise her voice, didn't throw accusations. She simply asked, her voice quiet but steady, "How long?" Michael's mouth opened, but no answer came. His silence said everything. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze, shame burning through him. That silence was a confession more powerful than any words. Sarah set the phone on the table and stepped back. Her heart ached with a mix of anger and sorrow. But mostly, it was disappointment. She had trusted him with everything, and now that trust was shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall in front of him. The hours that followed passed like a storm. Michael tried to explain, stumbling through half-formed apologies, telling her he never meant for it to go so far, that it had been a mistake he couldn't control. But every word only cut deeper. Sarah didn't want excuses. She wanted the man she had married, the man who had once looked at her with devotion. That man, she realized, was gone. In the days after, the house was filled with silence. They moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when necessary. Sarah cried behind closed doors, her heart breaking in quiet pieces. Michael, consumed with guilt, replayed every choice that had led him here. Emily Wisconche had quietly stepped out of his life once the truth surfaced, but her absence didn't undo the damage. The betrayal was already carved deep into the walls of his home. Sarah questioned everything now. Every late night at the office, every distracted smile, every cold moment at dinner, all of it had meaning she hadn't wanted to see. Trust, once broken, didn't mend easily. She looked at Michael and wondered, she had ever truly known him at all. Michael felt the weight of his mistake everywhere he went. At work, he kept his head down, avoiding Emily's empty desk. At home, he tried to reach for Sarah, but she pulled away, her eyes guarded. He had thought he could control the situation, that he could balance 2 worlds, but he had been wrong. A moment of weakness had unraveled years of love, and now he was left with the ruins. Nights were the hardest. Lying beside Sarah, he could feel the distance between them like a canyon. She no longer rested her head on his shoulder. She no longer whispered goodnight. The silence screamed louder than any argument. He wanted to hold her, to beg her forgiveness. But he knew words alone couldn't erase the pain. Weeks passed, but the wound remained raw. Friends noticed the change in them, the forced smiles, the tired eyes. Sarah avoided gatherings, unwilling to pretend. Michael worked longer hours, though not with the same energy, more as a way to escape the quiet house that no longer felt like home. One evening, Sarah finally spoke. They sat in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "Do you love her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's throat tightened. No, it wasn't love. It was a mistake. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. But you loved the way she made you feel, and that's what hurts the most. Her words struck him harder than anger ever could. She was right. It hadn't been about love, but about the part of him that craved attention, excitement, validation. And in chasing that, had destroyed the one person who had loved him faithfully for years. From that night on, their marriage stood at a fragile crossroads. They spoke more honestly, but the honesty was painful. Sarah admitted her trust was broken. Michael admitted his shame was unbearable. They both knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Emily was gone from his life completely. A chapter closed, but her shadow lingered in every conversation, every silence, every attempt to heal. Michael thought often about the moment he had lost control, the second he chose not to step back, and how that single choice had changed everything. The story didn't end with a clean resolution. Some wounds never heal perfectly, and some choices leave scars that time cannot erase. For Sarah, the betrayal became a part of her history, something she carried like an invisible weight. For Michael, it became a reminder of how quickly trust can shatter, and how fragile love truly is when taken for granted. Life moved forward, but nothing was ever the same again. The laughter they once shared felt distant. The warmth they once knew seemed unreachable. They lived under the same roof, but the innocence of their marriage was gone forever. Michael often sat alone at night, staring out the window, thinking about the man he had been before that rainy evening in the office. He longed to undo it, to turn back time, to choose differently. But life offered no rewinds, only lessons carved deep into the heart. And so he carried the weight of his mistake, knowing that in one moment of lost control, he had altered the course of his life, his marriage, and his future. The world outside their home kept moving, seasons changed. Deadlines passed, the city buzzed with life, but inside, both Michael and Sarah knew the truth. Their story had shifted. Their love had been tested. And no matter how hard they tried, nothing could erase the fact that nothing was ever the same again.